Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Work From Home Show. Shout out to all our homies, homeboys, homegirls, home trans, all the work from homers out there. I'm Naresh Vissa. Today we have James L. Swanson on the show. He is a New York Times bestselling author of the book MANHUNT, the 12-day chase for Lincoln's killer and chasing Lincoln's killer. And he's also author of the new book, The DEERFIELD Massacre, a surprise attack, a forced march, and the fight for survival in early America. He is also senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. James L. Swanson, thank you so much for joining us on the Work From Home Show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
You actually have a degree from UCLA Law School, which is a fantastic law school. Can you walk us through your career and your journey? How did you go from, I'm assuming, lawyer or attorney to writing historical nonfiction bestsellers?
Well, I began even before then. I grew up loving history. I grew up in a family of storytellers. My grandmother worked for the big Chicago newspapers at the tail end of the Ben Hecht front page era. And she was a fantastic storyteller. I remember when I was 6 years old, she said to me, "Jamie, did you know that during the World's Fair of 1893 in Chicago, a madman doctor murdered 100 girls and dissolved their bodies in acid?" I was 6. My mother said, "No, he didn't know that until you've just told him." And so that gripped my imagination forever. My grandfather was a Chicago policeman from the 1930s to the late 1960s, the era from the gangsters and Al Capone to the civil rights and Vietnam War protests. And he came home one day from work and said, "Don't let Jamie read the newspapers tonight." So, of course, what did I do but read the newspapers that night? And I read about Richard Speck, the madman, the maniac who murdered 7 or 8 student nurses in their apartment. And since that time, I've been an avid newspaper reader. I still get 6 newspapers every day in hard copy. And so at University of Chicago, I studied history under the great John Hope Franklin, author From Slavery to Freedom and many other books, and studied the Civil War, the Revolution, early America, African American history. And so before I even got out of college, I was predisposed to great historical stories. And I went to law school. And then after that, I practiced law. I worked for the government, clerked on a U.S. court, and had various government positions. So I've really gone between government, public service, and writing. Been at Department of Justice, National Endowment for Humanities, and all that. Written for the Chicago Tribune, and then written my books. And so I view that really as a natural extension of my obsessions. Ever since I was a boy, I've been interested in presidents, violence, assassinations, murder, not because I have a bloodlust, but because I'm very interested in key moments of overnight change in American history. And I found that through these stories about Martin Luther King, John Kennedy, Abraham Lincoln, and now the Deerfield Massacre, I've really gravitated toward these stories of important change in American history.
While you were working full-time for the city, I think you said for the city or the government, how did you have the time to research and write?
Well, I really work double shifts. By day, I can work my day job, and then by night, I work on my research, my historical writing, and other things. And so essentially, I have 2 jobs. When I work in the government or when I do public service or do law. My day job is the public service and the law, and my night job is writing about history and the arts and things that interest me.
And your first book, when was that written? How did you get it published? How long ago was it?
Well, that book was MANHUNT, the 12-day chase for Lincoln's killer. It took me a couple of years to write that, but I had studied the Lincoln assassination for many years. I'm from Illinois, from Chicago, and I was born on Lincoln's birthday. In fact, when I was 10, that same grandmother of mine who worked for the Chicago newspapers gave me an unusual gift that you might give a child. Not a baseball bat, not a bicycle. She gave me a framed engraving of John Wilkes Booth's Derringer pistol that he used to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. And then framed with that engraving was a clipping from the Chicago Tribune from the morning of April 15th, 1865, the morning that Lincoln died. And I remember reading that clipping. Booth, the assassin, shoots the president, leaps to the stage, runs off into the wings, and at that point, somebody had cut the clipping in mid-sentence. And I couldn't finish reading the story. So I said to myself as a boy, I've got to know the rest of that story. I've got to know. And so that got me interested in writing and reading about Abraham Lincoln. And so in a way, I've been working on the Manhunt book all my life, but really it took a couple of years to write. And that was published in 2007. And finally, after years of work, that Manhunt book is now an Apple TV 7-part, 7-hour series that will be broadcast soon on Apple TV this month. And it's a great show because the Lincoln assassination story and the end of the Civil War are so big, so exciting, so frightening that it's impossible to tell that story as a 2-hour feature film. It only really works as a miniseries or limited series. And so it's great. I've seen it several times. I was one of the executive producers and present for some of the filming too. It stars Tobias Menzies from Outlander and The Crown, the actress Lily Taylor. Patton Oswalt, the comedian, plays one of the detectives hunting for John Wilkes Booth. Matt Walsh plays the notorious Dr. Mudd, who helped fix Booth's broken leg. And so it's a great series. So the whole Manhunt Lincoln assassination saga has really been part of my life for many, many years.
What was your involvement in that Apple TV production? Did you write any of the scripts, or were you a consultant or a producer?
Well, I was one of the executive producers, and I read all the scripts in advance and gave knowledge and comments. And so I've been deeply involved from the beginning of the show. And it's finally great to see a story I've lived with since my childhood finally on the screen.
So this book, Manhunt, it is specifically about John Wilkes Booth after he assassinated Lincoln. And you brought up when you were a kid, you started reading about the Lincoln story. I just find it incredible that you were so interested in this one specific event that you wrote this huge book about. I mean, Manhunt is how many pages? 300 pages or so?
It's over 400 pages.
400 pages? Like, that's pretty incredible. How did you find more research? Did you go to libraries? Did you go visit Virginia and do your own investigations? Walk us through not
Well,
just
really,
this book, but all your books. How do you do your research?
really a combination of these things. One, I can't do a book without seeing original items or going to places where it happened. I need the resonance of the experience of going to where things happened, seeing them myself. I must have gone to Ford's Theater a few hundred times where Lincoln was shot. The same for the Peterson House, where Lincoln died on the morning of April 15th, 1865. And so that's one of my methods first. I need to commune with a real place to get the vibe of it, the feeling of it. And so that's one thing I do. Then, over the years, I built up a huge library of books and articles and pamphlets and other things about Abraham Lincoln. So I had my own huge personal research library. Then I turned to how things were reported at the time, original newspapers. In fact, with that clipping I mentioned that was framed with the John Wilkes Booth engraving, during my research for Manhunt, I acquired an entire set of Chicago Tribunes from really the spring of 1865 through the trial of Booth's conspirators. So I finally had in my hands the whole original newspaper from that time, as well as a few hundred more. And then photographs of the time, prints, lithographs, engravings, three-dimensional objects, locks of Lincoln's hair, a piece of the actress Laura Keene's dress stained with Lincoln's blood. All these objects speak to me. It's almost like that TV series Outlander that Tobias is famous for. Uh, I need the touch of the physical objects to have that experience. I feel history come alive, connecting to the objects, the places, the original periodicals, the photographs, the books. And that's really the methods I use. And then, of course, I try to write my books in the style of a novel, but with everything being true. And by style of a novel, I mean I tell the story in real time as it happens, day by day, hour by hour, and minute by minute, because I want the reader to feel that they're experiencing it as it's happening in real time. So I tell things in chronological order. I don't foreshadow. I don't tell things too far in advance of when they actually happened. So I want the reader to feel like they're a person living at the time, reading about it as it's happening.
And do you get advances to help fund these? You said you visited Ford's Theater 400 times or more than 400 times.
Well, I live in Washington, D.C.,
Okay.
and so it's been easy for me to visit a lot of the sites where this Lincoln story happened. And beyond that, it's more than just John Wilkes Booth killing Lincoln. I really set the context at the end of the Civil War, who Lincoln was, who Edwin Stanton is, Lincoln's partner and Secretary of War in ending the war. And the role Tobias plays is Secretary of War Stanton, who's one of the great unsung heroes in American history. He was really at Lincoln's side. Lincoln called him his Mars, his god of war. And when Lincoln was assassinated, Stanton had to do many things at once. He had to investigate the crime, launch the manhunt for John Wilkes Booth and his accomplices, continue to fight and win the Civil War, because when Lincoln died, Lee had surrendered at Appomattox to General Grant, but the war was still going on. And then Stanton had to organize the trial of the conspirators, and he also had to organize the wonderful, magnificent funeral train that took Lincoln's body through all the great cities of the North to display him in an open coffin to his followers and supporters in Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York City, Ohio, Indiana, Chicago, then back to Springfield. And so Edwin Stanton is really one of the great unsung heroes of American history, which is why it was so important that someone of the quality and talent of Tobias Menzies would play this part in the Apple series.
In this first book, Manhunt, what a first book to come out with. How did you get the book deal? Did you have an agent? Did you pitch the idea yourself? Walk us through that process.
Yeah, no, I had a literary agent, and we offered the idea to several publishers. For nonfiction books, it's best to really write a book proposal, which is, anything from a 25 to 50 page double-spaced document that describes what the book is and what it will be. And so I did that, and several publishers were interested, and that's how we sold the book. It's a better idea to get someone to buy a book before you write it, to save all that effort and all that work, so you don't do it for nothing. So that's what we did. We found a publisher who was very interested, and we did a contract with them to publish the Manhunt book.
How did you find your agent?
Through friends, through word of mouth. A friend of mine was represented by the same agency, and that agency recommended a particular agent there who had a real love for American history and who had studied American history himself.
Good. Well, your new book, The Deerfield Massacre, walk us through what that's all about. And going back to the earlier question, did you have to travel for this one also? And did you have to pay out of your pocket, or how did that work?
Well, the Deerfield Massacre is really about one of the bloodiest, most frightening, and faith-inspiring stories from early American history, from a lost period of time, long before the American Revolution. We don't remember much about this era today. It happened in 1704, when France and England were vying for control of the North American continent. And there was a war in Europe called Queen Anne's War between European powers about who would have the right to become the new king of Spain. And that war crossed the seas and came to America. And the French were in Canada, then known as New France. And the French Catholics, and also led by their Jesuit leaders, organized raids against New England, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maine, and other early colonies to help drive the English out of their colonies. And Deerfield was a very remote outpost in northwest Massachusetts. Uh, and so one day in leap year, February 29th, 1704, a raiding party of over 300 Indian tribes and their French allies marched 300 miles down from Canada through the snow and the ice and raided Deerfield. They crept into town, leaped over a palisade fence guarding the houses, and launched the attack. And on that night, they killed over 50 townspeople, captured 112 people, and took them on a forced march back to Canada, including their minister, the Reverend John Williams. And on that march back, they killed 20 more residents of Deerfield with war clubs, tomahawks. Anyone who could not keep up was killed along the way. So it's really one of the greatest stories of faith and endurance and family and survival, and ultimately redemption and returning home. And Reverend Williams wrote a famous book called The Redeemed Captive about the exploits and sufferings of the people in this adventure. And he became one of the great heroes of early America. And it's so far remote in our past. It was a time of witchcraft. The Salem witchcraft trials had happened recently. It was a time of fear and superstition, Indian raids. People would disappear from the forest. They would be kidnapped or killed. And so it's a remote early America that even George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin wouldn't recognize. None of the founders had been born yet. This is really the dawn of the colonization of early America. So in a nutshell, that's the story of the Deerfield Massacre book.
And as far as your research went, did you have to visit different sites or you did this all from home? How did that work?
I visited the sites, and I had spent a time living in Deerfield. Uh, every summer, Deerfield, which is a historic town, historic Deerfield is there. It's a museum town of 15 or 20 museum houses, plus a separate museum and educational programs. And every summer, they host 6 to 8 college students for Historic Deerfield Fellowship in Early American History, where we study material culture, decorative arts, the history, the documents, the objects, the artifacts. And Deerfield is really, I think, the best documented town in early American history. And then there's another museum in town, the Pecumtuck Valley Memorial Association, which is really a museum of early American life. And in that museum, they have the most celebrated relic from the night of the Deerfield Massacre, an object called the Old Indian Door, which could not be battered down during the attack. It bears multiple tomahawk slices, axe slices. Ultimately, the tribes were able to cut a hole through the door and thrust a musket barrel through and fired a wild shot, which ended up killing a woman. But that tomahawk scarred door is one of the most famous relics from early American history, and it survives, and it's in that museum in Deerfield, the Pecumtuck Valley Memorial Association. So I've spent a lot of time in Deerfield, and I've gone back for visits and other trips. So I've gone to a lot of the original sites involved in the story.
Are you full-time writing now, or do you also practice law?
I'm writing full time, but I'm also a federal commissioner appointed to the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission, the agency of the federal government, the U.S. Congress. And the purpose of this commission is to plan and coordinate the celebration in 2026 of the 250th anniversary of the United States. So those are my two principal activities now.
Very good. Well, James L. Swanson, New York Times bestselling author of Manhunt, The 12-Day Chase for Lincoln's Killer and Chasing Lincoln's Killer. That book has been turned into an Apple TV series, so check it out on Apple TV. And also, Swanson is the author of the new book, The Deerfield Massacre, A Surprise Attack, A Forced March, and the Fight for Survival in Early America. James Swanson, thank you so much for joining us on the Work From Home show. Any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners or anything else you want to promote?
Yeah, just this. I think we need more historical knowledge in America now. Uh, I'm optimistic because I also write children's books for young adults. Scholastic, the publisher of Harry Potter, publishes my young adult books, and they're for ages of maybe 9 to 13. And in going to schools and visiting schools, the young people tell me they love history. They find it often taught in a boring way in schools, but they love the excitement, the drama. And so I think we need to have a greater resurgence of interest in history in young people. And they love it. And we just need to expose them to it. And as we approach the 250th anniversary of the United States, I think this is going to happen much more. We're getting more interested in history now, our origins, the founding of the nation. And so I'm very optimistic about the next few years. There's going to be a greater resurgence of a public passion for our past and for our history.
I completely agree with that. I'm a huge fan of history. That's why we brought you on the show. It was one of the best subjects for me, at least in school. I didn't major in it or anything. I've always been a history lover, and I think we need to bring back history. When I say bring back history, I mean the excitement around
Yes.
history, because there's this, if you want to call it propaganda, that, oh, history is a worthless subject. Like, how does that help you? How does the subject of history help you find a job or work a job or make money or be a contributing member to society? And I think that's a very backwards way of looking at it. I think history can absolutely, the lessons that we take from it, just knowing the stories, there's a lot of spiritual strength in history for sure.
No, it's true. You're right, because uh, history can contribute to one's life in so many ways. History can make someone a better writer, a clearer thinker, can give them context to understand our times. I think history can make somebody a better employee, a better candidate for a job. Uh, you don't have to do history to have it help your life. I agree totally.
Yeah, and I think there's just jumping the gun because the mainstream media talks about the cancellation of history and taking down statues and removing chapters. And I say we're not even there yet. I mean, the kids, most of these kids just don't even care. They're not paying attention, and they don't even care. We need to get them interested in history again. That's the important, and adults too.
Yeah, I think history can very much be as or more exciting than fiction.
Yeah. Very good, James L. Swanson. Thanks again for joining us on the Work From Home Show. To all our listeners, check us out at workfromhomeshow.com. That's www.workfromhomeshow.com. Get on our mailing list there. If you have any questions, reach out to us. hello@workfromhomeshow.com. That's hello@workfromhomeshow.com. Follow us on social media. We're on X, we're on Facebook, we're on a few other platforms. Just type in Work From Home Show. And until next week, keep on working from home.